welcome back to Design Deconstructed. This is episode 13, where we are going to be taking a deeper dive, on Chapter 7, also called Deepest Secrets. And I will just say right out of the gate, it is my favorite piece of content. I will reiterate that throughout the presentation today. That I got to work on for End of Dragons. It was for a number of reasons. One is that it is a standalone map, and we don't often get to do those, but they are really super fun because you can have a lot more flexibility and freedom to do things with a custom map than when you have an open world map that shares space with events or other pieces of open world content where you kind of have to give and take a little bit to if they need this for another boss event or a meta or just a collection. Those spaces have to work in both contexts, and with this it literally only needed to work in one, which was this instance, and so we could get really crazy and do all kinds of like really spot custom things that you can't normally do in some of our other story chapters. So I was really excited about that. I think it's some of the best writing that we have in our expansion, and we collaborated a lot, and everybody that we collaborated with just did a stellar job of turning this instance into something that I think is really special. So I don't want to give too much into pre-talking about it. I would just love to hop into the game and let you all experience it along with me. So without further ado, let's take a look at Chapter 7, Deepest Secrets, where we are going to go under the sea to the Yang reactor, and we will have lots of fun. All right, I will see you in game. All right, let's jump in here. Going to be going into Chapter 7, titled Deepest Secrets. This actually, for the longest time though, one of the things that I have done, Connor did this as well, is until we had actual chapter names, we, designers would kind of playfully stub in names for our chapters. So like Chapter 6 used to be called Jade Runner, and Chapter 7 was originally called Suwon Sum, Sulu Sum. So sadly that did not make the final cut, and ended up being called Deepest Secrets instead. But yeah, Suwon Sum, Sulu Sum will always live in my heart. And now you all get to experience the joy of bad designer puns. It is one of those things that when you're in early development, you have to kind of find things. It's a truism that part of game design is what we call finding the fun. And when you're early in development and not everything is online yet, and some of the armies aren't in place, and game mechanics are kind of like roughed in or prototyped at most, it's hard to find the fun. So I think we tend to try to find the fun in other ways by being ridiculous with our puns and being super silly. So yeah. Okay, heading over to the northwestern side of Kaining City. Up the giant stairs. I don't have a charge. Oh, there's a charged battery right there. Yay. So I can use a teleporter. Oh. Actually, maybe I can't use it. I never know which one is which. Oh my gosh. Okay. Since I am terrible and don't remember what this one is called, I'm just going to glide instead. Reactor Station. This was a fun little thing that we added. We didn't used to have this little security setup, but it was one of those things where I think narratively it didn't really fit that, you know, June basically in the previous instance had said that she needed to wave us in, which means that she doesn't let just anybody come to her secret facility. So we put in this little security station. It has lots of protection, so if you're not on this quest step, you don't have access to this area. You'll get kicked out. There's probably a few clever workarounds to that, but I tried to catch all of the possible edge cases of mounting, gliding, and various things that will kick you out. Anyway, don't take that as a challenge. And I'm sure a lot of you are going to do exactly that and take that as a challenge to try to get in here when you're not supposed to. Yeah, so let's enter the young reactor. While it's loading, I will say this is hands down the favorite piece of content that I built for End of Dragons. There are many reasons why that is so. Not the least of which is because it is a custom map, and you know, we had a lot of fun building this map out and, you know, decorating it, and you know, we definitely drew on some other references.
She'll be here soon. Long way from Xingjie.
I'm sure a few of you will recognize there's kind of a combination here of I'm a huge fan of the Deus Ex game franchise, and they have a similar thing with a globe with tentacles reaching across it. And of course, Rapture from BioShock was another one of our sort of touch points for what this might, what Jade Tech might look like undersea. But yeah, part of the reason that I liked this instance so much is because we basically had carte blanche on this instance to explore any number of different potential ideas for it. So, you know, we put fish in the sky because, little known fact, Guild Wars 2, we have a water plane, but the water plane, anything below the water plane would be considered swimming, so the player would be swimming in here even though technically we're not in the water. If the water plane was above us, the game would think that we were in water. So the water plane is actually far, far below us, and we are doing a lot of trickery to make it look like you're under the water when we're not actually under the water. So, little behind-the-scenes tidbit. Before I jump on the tram, I do want to talk a little bit about this. When we talked about the need here for us to have this undersea facility, you know, once you get in the facility, you know, the action kind of takes over, and it is a pretty breakneck pace. You go from 0 to 60 quite quickly through this chapter. And we wanted to have a bit of a space for the player to breathe a bit. And I had the idea that, well, what if you got a tour? Initially, the tour was this tour guide only, who basically gave lots and lots of exposition and told you about June and Junlai Jade and, you know, and this facility. And, you know, it was it was great. It served the purpose, but it was sort of leaving something on the cutting room floor, which was we don't get to know June as much. And so Kwan Peng, our narrative lead, had been the one when he wrote the pass of the dialogue for this chapter. He had the tour guide get sort of co-opted by June, as we will see in a minute. So.
Your safety is our priority. Please keep any appendages inside the
And I also really loved the idea of a sort of a almost like a theme park ride, you know. Yes, as I said, we drew for some inspirations. This definitely has a bit of the Jurassic Park tour that the archaeologists get at the beginning to show off Jurassic Park. I think June is similarly somebody who has a strong enough ego that she would want to show off to anybody, you know, state heads of state or investors. She would want to have a way to demonstrate what her technology has given to Cantha. And I don't think that is necessarily narcissistic. I think there's maybe a bit of that, but I really do. Like, June just has worked her butt off to get where she is, and she is proud of the fact that she has done something for Cantha that no one else has done. And in this case, specifically, she's talking about her relationship with Suwan. And trying to reassure us that her plans are actually benevolent, and that, you know, she has everything under control. And as, of course, our team is somewhat skeptical. But, you know, we've been dealing with Elder Dragons in our way, and she's dealt with her Elder Dragon in a very different way. So it's a really interesting sort of different perspectives on this problem that Tyria has had to deal with for, you know, generations now.
That magic's becoming increasingly unstable.
Well, it's less of a bug in the system and the more the fact that we have kind of mucked things up over the last few years, but we're not going to tell June that.
No one could have foreseen Jade technology until I made it a reality.
What's this place?
Jesse, our map artist for this, Jesse Christensen, did an amazing job making this feel like an undersea world with the fish and the plant life and sharks. And I put the whales in because we wanted the whales to be scripted in a very particular way. So I added the whales, but the other sea life is all Jesse.
It's a delicate ecosystem. You know why we built the reactor underwater?
And the purpose of this tour serves two things. One is it gives us, obviously, a nice window into June as she explains what's going on to us and her rationale for why she's doing what she's doing. The other thing it does is it gives us a little bit of a preview of the level, so that players can see where things are, and you know, this little maintenance chamber will come back in the story later. So, you know, it's a nice way to foreshadow a bit of what's coming.
I invite you to see the rest of the facility. As we return to the reception area, you may notice fish and other fantastic marine life. The unending
It is a whale, Gorek.
thousands of aquatic species.
I love Gorek.
Building a sustainable future. Your generous investment is
This tour guide also had really, really terrible puns as the tour went, and all of that was also removed.
I don't feel so good.
Someday maybe I'll release the alternate version of the tour where she talked in great depths, about various things with the factory here, the power plant, the reactor. I always get the names confused because we've changed things so often. This used to be called the power plant, and then we realized, oh no, the power plant is the one in Kaining, so this has to be the reactor. Yeah. All right.
So, just making sure we're
Head down.
aligned.
we're not okay with this, right? I'm taking June's word with several grains of salt.
You've seen Cantha with your own eyes.
One of the other things that I will also call out that has been really beneficial to us is we have made we have been able to make great use now of moving platforms. So the tour tram, the elevator, these are things that
She says none.
used to be really difficult or bad performance. And over the years, we refined the code side of moving platforms as well as our physics engine and our nav mesh. And so we are actually now able to use moving platforms like elevators in a fairly consistent manner without it causing too many problems. You can still see some sketchiness, like when you go on and off moving platforms, NPCs, because there's nav mesh on the moving platform and there's nav mesh outside of it. But to get from this nav mesh to that nav mesh, sometimes they have to do tricky things like teleport from the edge of one to the edge of the other. So it's not perfect. You know, this is one of the few sort of remaining things in our engine that I wish we had better solutions for. They also sometimes sink into the props, which is fun. Anyway, I don't want to draw too many attentions to our flaws, but I don't want to ignore the fact that they're there. Getting these two guys to escort you was also much harder than it sounded, because we actually do have follow actions in our game. That's what our Biconics use. Like Marjorie and Mytrin and Gork are using our follow action, and they are pretty good. But as you see with follow, they pick a random point near you and they move to it, which is not what guards who are escorting you would do, right? Like, so these mechs, I wanted them to be flanking the player at all times, because that's what guards would do, right? Like, you would take up positions at your side so that if you decide that you're gonna go crazy, they can easily sort of get you under control. But that's not an easy thing to do. So I actually ended up having to do some trickery here, where basically they're constantly querying the player's position. It's a super expensive thing to do. I wouldn't do it if there was like a lot of other things going on. But because there's really not much else going on here, for the duration of this period where you're exploring, I was okay with the fact that they're basically constantly querying where you are and adapting their own positions to be like offset by X, not X, by Y, by either positive Y or negative Y, to, you know, and so like you can strafe and they will adjust. It's kind of a cool thing. I actually wish that our follow acted a little bit more like this, but it is not a cheap thing to do on our scripting side. So I can't imagine that our code would be any less expensive. The place where it does kind of fall down a bit is if you walk. You see they kind of stop animating correctly, but very few people do walk, so I was kind of okay with that. You know, we made this section to be you know, a chance for you to explore around, take in the sights, take in the giant reactor and the batteries, and see how things are. There's a neat little thing that I'll go over here that is, I don't think anyone's talked to this guy yet. I don't know, maybe they have. He's here as a hint that, like, hey, as long as I'm standing here, you're not getting in. Well, later he won't be standing there, so we will be able to get in. Yeah, we put in some just light. There was, this is another thing, there used to be more sort of expository documents in here that we ended up having to cut for scope. You know, it's no secret that, like, I really love lore and I really love putting in extra bits of stuff, but I sometimes go a little crazy and I take on you know, it's easy for me to write that. It is not so easy to pass that off to editing and localization and narrative to, make their pass at it and make sure that all, everything is fitting our style guide, and, so yeah. So sometimes things that you do, don't actually make it into the game, which is cool. That's fine.
Just a moment, Commander.
Poorly.
Security AI grant you access.
Not poorly at all. He's a dick.
This area is restricted to authorized personnel only. Project Horizon.
Again, this is another example of how far Jade Tech is compared to what we have in Interior. They have biometric scanners. That's fairly high tech.
System lockdown in progress. Autonomous security active. Have a nice day.
Another thing we really liked is we ended up talking about whether or not, or what the voice for the security system, the overhead PA system would be, and it really made sense that it would be June. It's her voice, right? Like, she is definitely not. I mean, she's a little full of herself, right? Let's be honest. June definitely has. I don't know. Earlier I said maybe she's not so narcissistic, but I don't know. You could probably argue that she is quite narcissistic, in some ways, anyway. I mean, again, I think some of that is earned, right? Like, she definitely has done a lot and is rightly proud of her accomplishments. So it's one of those where, like, maybe some people are, they can talk the talk and walk the walk, and I think June is definitely the latter.
3 more to go. Of course. I wanted to learn from you, June.
This encounter, this went through a lot of iterations. Well, it didn't actually used to be in here, really. There was a section where she had to override security, but it was very different. It involved puzzle solving and other things. And eventually we ended up being this, because it felt like, yeah, this is my kind of really proving her usefulness now. She's fully part of the team. I know that we've had previous moments where we distrusted her, but here she is, she's completely doing things to help the team. And we really wanted it to feel like she had some really valuable skills that we needed her right on our side. The things that changed the most about this encounter was this used to be way more chaotic, in the sense that you just had this endless parade of Jade mechs that would keep spawning. And for the most part, it was feasible. It didn't really hurt. It didn't hurt the player. Like, we had many play tests where that whole system was in, and everyone seemed to like it. But where it continually fell down for me, from the scripting side, is with an endless stream of enemies. Goric and Marjorie would basically get completely lost. They would lose. They would stay behind and keep fighting, and so you'd lose all the dialogue, because you'd be having conversations and you could hear my Trin, but Marjorie and Goric would be like all the way back by the front door still, and it'd be like, okay, I can't hear them at all. Or we would have to make it so that you could hear them, but then it didn't make sense because you couldn't see them because they were nowhere to be seen. They were off doing their own thing, and it was just, not a good situation. So I ended up tweaking it so that there are endless waves, but they are constrained to around each reactor. So as my unlocks or sort of hacks the security terminals, it turns off that local group and turns on the next one. So that way, the action can continually flow from spot to spot. And now all the engineers are fleeing, heading out of the reactor because they don't want these security mechs to come back online. I think it's safe, obviously, but they don't know that.
Give me a moment and I'll get us in.
All right, so now, as we said before,
Are you always this snoopy?
It's literally in
the
my
guard has left his post,
It's
so
not
it gives
breaking in.
Marjorie an opportunity to sneak in to June's office. Thank you, Marjorie. And so, just as we did with Mai's apartment, when we have June's office, and later we will see her mansion, which is meticulous. Spoilers, sorry, but her mansion, her house where she lives, is pristine. Like, everything is perfectly cleaned up, and I thought, where would she do that with her office? And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, no, like this is sort of like where she works. Like, she does have a lab in her home where she does a lot of her work too, and that also has a little bit of this sort of chaos. But I really wanted to be like, hey, when she's down here working, since this isn't her primary office, I think she does do most of her work at her mansion. I think we even say that somewhere in chapter 12. But this is kind of where she comes when she really has serious technical problems to work through and prototyping to do. So I'm like, this is definitely not well cared for. Like, it's just, she comes in, she does her work, and she leaves. She's not going to spend a lot of time making this place look neat. So, stacks of books everywhere, a plant that's dead, a painting that she never hung up. This is one of the plaques from her office or from her mansion, also not hung up. An old bowl. I definitely cribbed this from some of the desks at ArenaNet, mine included, where there's food bowls and chopsticks from a week ago. Like, I don't know, like, she just does not have time. She's way too busy here to take care of anything, right? Like, it's just a matter of, what do I need to do to get my job done for the day? And then we also put in here some extra fun fun lore books, which give us a little more window into the young reactor, into June, into Junlai Jade, Captain Fa, who filed this security report, which talks, in this one, it talks about the fact that Mai Trin did try to sneak in to the Yang reactor, which is how she knows a little bit about it. She didn't get farther than this area before she got caught. But yeah, Mai Trin definitely has a history here. And then, as has happened in real life, Mai Trin saw the potential in, or June rather, saw the potential in Mai Trin. That even though she was caught red-handed, sort of snooping around where she wasn't supposed to be, she decided, you know what, this person might actually be of use to me. If they could get this far into my reactor, they clearly have skills that might be beneficial to me. And so, just as some government agencies or other companies might hire hackers to basically be white hat members of their employment force, June did the same thing. So they caught Mai Trin breaking in, saw the potential in her to maybe offer some assistance that they might not have in their organization, and she became an employee of Junlai Jade. This is Mintel report, which I'm not sure we really made this clear enough. This was something we talked about and went back and forth, but we were kind of past text lock and couldn't adjust it easily. But because this classified dossier from Mintel is in this stack of documents, which is in this big pile of stuff that is neglected by June, she never read that. So she never actually learned about Mai Trin until after Mai Trin betrayed her. So that's just, again, goes to show sometimes you have to read your emails. All right, so this is June's computer. There's a couple little hidden things in here. There's a nice little audio log between June and Mai.
I don't really know how. It's stupid. I'm an open book. How do you do it? All of it, I mean. The politics, the business, the engineering. When I watch you work, I think to myself,
I'm not going to listen. I've heard it too many times. You can go to the HR file.
maybe it's in my nature.
There's nothing there.
Maybe I'm doing this
There's
all
resources
for my father.
where you can actually print an Indigo clearance access token. Yes, that is a reference to Indigo, our amazing narrative lead.
You're a smart woman. Do you really
So I'll
want
print
to
one
live
of those.
forever? A sky pirate?
And then you can also try to access the private file. And this is a bit of a little... we haven't done this trick in a while, I don't think, but it's a thing where you can put a timer on conversation options. So in this case, you try to access it, and it looks like, oh, nothing happened. And a lot of players, some players might be like, oh, well, I guess leave it alone or go back. But I put this text in here of a spinning hourglass turning in place, hoping that you might have a clue of like, oh, what do you do when you see a spinning hourglass? You wait, right? Like it's loading. And so, yeah, the timer expires, and then it shows you her sensitive documents. And the reason that works in this case is because, the reason you can even access this console at all is because my Trin went around and basically disabled security for this sector, right? So like everything is now open. So you can read her emails, and in this case, you can get a security update where she has a passcode for her home network that they locked down because they were concerned about my Trin and the Aetherblades accessing their systems. So they gave her a temporary password to get in there and update her security, which she also never did or never saw.
Mai, if you're serious about turning over a new leaf, we can help. Maybe you don't have to be just a sky pirate.
Let's just find Anka.
Okay. Since we printed off an Indigo clearance token, now we can go over here to this console and, hey, look, it needs Indigo clearance token. I have one. So now we get to open this other door. And in here, there's some lore books and there's some environmental storytelling here. I put some evidence here that the Aetherblades had, basically thrown a gas bomb in here, and I'd like to think that these people are not dead, but I think they probably are dead. I don't know. The Aetherblades don't strike me as having a lot of mercy. So maybe it's poison gas that's actually lethal. But, there's also some Aetherblade weapons and a bunch of dead bodies. And again, my assumption here is that this is in part why June didn't have the information that she needed to have about the infiltration by the Aetherblades, is that Anka had a team come in here and wreck their control center, basically. One of their control centers. And so, yeah. Some operational reports on the young reactor. A bit of the history on the young reactor. It's good stuff. I did not put an achievement here, even though we talked about it. The reason being is that I'm a big fan of content sometimes being its own reward. And, this is just a nice little sort of secret thing that you can find.
There's an auxiliary maintenance corridor through the facility.
And I'm okay if a lot of players miss it,
Reactor chamber.
because it is just supplemental information. And I do think it's a case of that content is sort of its own reward.
What do you know about this alternate path through the reactor. Well, never mind. Forget I asked.
I did have at some point an alt line for this where if you had found June's office and you had read the report about Mytrin being apprehended while inside, Jory had a different line, or they had a different exchange about like, now I understand why you know your way around in here. You were here before, but we never got around to that. Sometimes those things, it's a minor thing that was easy to slip off of my list of things to remember to follow up on, and I never did it.
Paying attention in the Jadebot training course.
I've been wondering. This reactor, it's not so different from Dominova. That's where I first met Anka.
This section used to be a whole lot more complicated than it currently is. You used to have to bring power and do it was a fairly sophisticated puzzle that I designed, but I got some feedback, and also because we weren't sure how much players would play with Jade power stuff in the open world. If they're going straight through on story, we wanted this to really act in a lot of ways as a tutorial for how to use Jade batteries, routing and rerouting power. So this ended up being fairly simple. It's just, carrying a charge or two around. I did have a lot of fun setting these up so that, like the connected things would turn off when you drew power from them, and the ones that you couldn't reach, you don't. And this is actually a holdover from that earlier complex thing, because this is a Jade battery that you used to be able to plug your do the remote Jade mode and fly up there and take power from it. But again, we ran into so many notes about how this really needed to just be simple and do a very basic thing. And even though we did fly around in the Jade drone in the previous chapter, it ended up feeling like, no, we should keep it simple. Oh no, it's Anka.
You here, Mai. Seems you're finding some new friends. Oh, I see you're a little upset.
What's your plan here?
I always hated spoilers. Maybe I just wanted to see this visionary reactor with my own eyes. It really is something. Takes me back.
You can have the Aether Blades. I relinquish all authority to you. Just stop whatever it is you're doing.
Hate to be the bearer of bad news. The blades are already mine. It didn't take much convincing. The crew agrees. You've lost your way, Captain. You saw what I saw in the mist.
One of the other reasons that we kept this puzzle section simple and this power, the power cycling simple, is because,
Too bad.
as we will see here coming up, we're going to have a fairly complicated scenario take place requiring a lot of custom scripting. We're going to go into the Mine Palace, meet Suwan, come out of the Mine Palace, run over to Suwan physically, watch Anka use the extractor. Sorry, I'm spoiling the content. Hopefully you don't care about that. Anyway, there's a fairly lengthy cinematic moments that happen for the next 5 so minutes of the chapter that required a lot of debugging and a lot of testing. So in order to facilitate that, now I could have made another checkpoint to make that easy so that you could do this section, but we felt that it was probably okay to keep this simple so that we would only have to have one quest step for this entire section of getting through the gates. We could have changed it so that you had very specific hand holding instructions of take the jade charge from the battery. Now put the jade charge in the power core. Now open the first gate, and then and now take the charge and put it in the like we could have gotten really heavy-handed with like spelling out exactly what you need to do. But we thought if we kept this simple enough, players wouldn't struggle with what am I supposed to do, and that would enable us to not have to checkpoint this whole section, and still allow me to, like, in dev mode in our edit tool, I can fly through that whole section, skip over it completely, not even have to deal with any of that, and teleport here, and then just automatically trigger the Mind Palace and all that stuff. And so that was what I ended up doing, just because it was I think we did a good job, I think, of keeping this simple so that I could do my own sort of method of debugging this without having to add another goal to this chapter and another checkpoint, because those are not free either, and certainly has implications on QA, because QA has to test from every checkpoint. So it definitely adds development time. The Mind Palace.
Champion of Aureen.
Sorry, I'm going to talk
I'm
over Suon
grateful
and
to
all
have
this
met
stuff.
you at last.
This went through I don't know
You came to
how
rescue
many
me, didn't
iterations.
you?
This is a really
I
tough one
appreciate the
to get
gesture,
right.
But I don't need saving. Not from June.
We had a
anyway.
lot of issues with VFX in this environment.
It was
um,
I who proposed this
I initially
arrangement to her.
put some in
She's
that
an
we
audacious
already
one,
had,
Is she not?
thinking, oh, well, this will be fine,
This
right?
place,
And the VFX
it manages
lead
the
came
flow
at
of
me and was
magic
like,
between
no,
you
dude, you
and
can't do
June's
that. Like, this looks
ley lines.
terrible. And, like,
June used
so
a
we
different
had to definitely do a lot of
modular.
back and forth with art and
She
cinematics
takes the
team
magic I
on
shed
how to
make
make
new
this
dragon jade.
all very
It's the
clear
most harmonious
and representative.
Wait. The other
You
elder
know,
dragons.
this is one of those that seems deceptively simple,
Some of that magic went to Aureen, but
because I mean it really just is a walk and talk
Return to the
where
web of
there's a
ley
lot of
lines,
heavy
and then to
lore
me.
and in-depth
You
exposition
did what
here,
you had to do,
but
but I can't filter
really,
the magic
like,
alone.
it ends up being
Even when my children were alive,
like
I
these
couldn't filter it together.
balls that
As
represent
each of them fell,
the different elder
the
dragons
magic grew more corrupted.
were definitely,
No,
they ended up having to be custom
it's
made
become
and custom
something else.
animated,
Something disagreeable.
and even though we had a
to
lot of
mortal
void
life.
effects, the void effect that I was
I've
using
shielded my
needed
flock
to be
from it for a long
remade for
time,
this environment
but I
specifically.
cannot abate the flow of
Yeah,
magic
so
for much
there was
longer.
just a lot of back and
When
forth.
I'm gone,
We ended up storyboarding
all
this
of
out,
Gaia will
which
be
is something we
destroyed.
don't always do, especially
All
with
life
non-cinematic things.
there has to be a way to stop it.
But this is enough of a cinematic moment,
Aureen,
I think,
the
that
Scion.
we felt it was
She can
it
filter
justified.
all of the world's magic, but she must be ready.
And this magic
Without
flowing
me,
to Aureen is a
magic
new
will
custom
crush
effect that we
through her
had to
like a
ask
tsunami.
for, and we weren't sure we were going to get. But I mean,
It was my
you know,
intention to give her
it
more
turned
time.
out amazing. So I'm
Acclimate her to
glad
the
that
role.
we put that extra effort in,
But
because
it
I
looks
do
like
think
I
it
have
looks
none left to
really
give.
cool.
That's right. You're in danger, Suon. June's lost control of the reactor.
I know. It was a naive indulgence of mine to think I could stay here forever. Such mortal fancies are unbecoming of an elder dragon. Take care of Aureen. That is the role of a champion. And please, don't try to save me.
Wait, Suon! What does that mean? Suon!
You're back. Come on, we have to hurry.
Just want to give a shout out to our amazing creature artists who made and modeled Suon. She is absolutely gorgeous. I love seeing her. I mean, seeing her from her tail to her head here, it's so epic. And seeing this sort of like chamber, where it's almost like a temple, right? Like, June was not kidding when she said that, she treats Suon with reverence. Like this is as revenant as I can imagine anything being, right? Like even though she is having her magic siphoned off a little bit at a time to fuel the industry of Jade Tech. It definitely feels like they have a lot of respect for her, and that it is a it is a sort of beneficial relationship to both.
The entirety of your existence is harm, Elder Dragon. In this life, I'm only an ant. What I'm about to do, breaking the cycle, it's for a better world.
This also used to be a cinematic, or a cin event, and it still is a cin event. I would still say we still consider this a cin event, but we did a thing where we took camera control away and we framed it just so, and it felt a lot more like a cinematic, an in-game cinematic. And now we've made it so that it's more like an in-game event that happens.
This is Marine's stolen magic. Anka unleashed the extractor.
If your legs work, then we need to get out of here. Now, follow me. We need to help Suwon. We can't just abandon.
Malfunction detected. Status critical.
Love seeing the animations of her thrashing and screeching, and oh my gosh.
I don't know. The brainings compromised the entire structural integrity.
This whole section took a lot of doing, a lot of hand scripting, a lot of custom work. We went back and forth on this. I mean, this took a fairly lengthy chunk of development time for this chapter. Was this sequence, getting it just right. It's always tough, like moments like this in games where you're trying to evoke a mood without it being a crappy sort of play experience. So like we don't want it to be like, oh, you failed to get down there, so now you're gonna drown, right? Like I don't know, we don't really have the tech to do that, because this is one of those development tricks as well. This looks like the water plane. It's not. It's a prop. It's a prop that I'm moving up, and it looks like water. It's not really water. We can simulate it. Okay. It definitely we use the same shader as the water, and it has the same sort of visual look and feel, but it's not actual water. The moment coming up here is one that I added, of the elevator going out and losing power, in part because, so when we originally scoped this, we did not have Suwon escaping. I mean, we did, but we had no idea how we were going to pull that off, because the scope of animating the dragon and having the ceiling come down and all, we just didn't have the scope for it. It was going to take way too much from the animation team, from the prop team, from the environment art team, from the visual effects team, from the audio team. Like everyone was like, no, we can't do this. We don't have the time, right? Like there are other things that are way higher priority than this. So I was like, well, what if the power goes out? The elevator could fail and it turns black, and all we need is like one start animation, which we did kind of already have, because Suwon in the meta event had a thing where she flies away, right? Like, so I'm like, okay, we already have the base of that animation. Can we just change it a little bit and basically recycle it here? And that's what we did. And I think it actually worked out really well. I think it narratively works, right? Like, because of course, with water pouring into an undersea lab, absolutely it makes sense that main power would fail and they would go to reserve power. So that ended up working out really well. And now you're going to watch me get killed because I made this fight harder than it probably needed to be. It's really the quartermaster here who is a giant pain in the ass to fight. Yeah. Anyway, so Anka left behind some of her thugs, to stall us, to distract us. I always fight the quartermaster last because he's, like I say, he's kind of a pain. Sometimes, you know, I will use this opportunity to talk about difficulty in story chapters, because this is a tough one for us as a studio. I think a lot of, you know, we have a fair discrepancy between what, you know, the difference between somebody who plays primarily story and you know, is maybe not super invested in min-maxing their build, or, you know, and I fall into this group, right? Like I pick the weapons that I use based on how they look and feel to me, as opposed to whether or not I have the most, you know, the most maximized DPS. Like I don't even know that I care about DPS. If I'm playing content where DPS matters, that's when I will, you know, maybe take a look at, are there things that I can do to adjust my build. But for the most part, I pick things that I like and I stick with it, because I like playing my way, right? Like, and I think that's probably true of some number of our story-oriented players, our narrative players. But then we also have lots of players who do raiding, or world versus world, or, you know, fractals, or any number of things that do push players to move their power level up, right? And really focus on their DPS, their build. And it's tough. It's tough to balance story encounters for both of those groups, because it's a pretty wide gulf sometimes between what, like, my DPS. I think the last time I checked my DPS on my live characters, and I wouldn't look at this one because, again, this is kind of a throwaway character, but my live character, my thief, my daredevil, who is probably my highest DPS character, I think it was like maybe 5,000, right? Which is bad. Like, that's objectively, arguably not great for some of our content at level 80. I'm okay with that most of the time because I don't need to do more than that. But, you know, so when you have story encounters like this, you know, I think we want to cater it more toward the lower end of that spectrum. But it's tough because then the players who are at the higher end of that spectrum think that story content is an easy breezy experience. I'll be honest, I'm okay with that, right? Like, if story content is too easy for you, that is a much better problem to have, in my view, than to have narrative players who might not give much time or investment to their build or their class mechanics and whatnot. I'd rather it be doable for them and not put them behind, like, oh, the content that I love, that I really enjoy, I can't do because it's too hard. I think that's the greater evil of those two. So to me, the lesser of two evils is to err on the side of story content being easy, easier, with a few exceptions like Quartermaster Nisk, where, you know, in that scenario, I was okay with making that a harder encounter for two reasons. One, if you die to Quartermaster Nisk, you can just by attrition get your way past that encounter, because if you die and you retry from checkpoint, the checkpoint is right there by the elevator, so you don't have to walk very far back, right? Like, it's not hard to, like, eventually just res rush the Quartermaster until you defeat him. And also, if you get frustrated and you log off and you're like, I can't beat this guy, you can always pick up right from that checkpoint, and the checkpoint for it, again, is right by the elevator. So in situations like that, I very much have no problem making an encounter, a combat encounter in a story mission harder, because I think, you know, we do what we can to make it feasibly achievable for most players, and then for those who don't, make it easy for you to get past it eventually. This is one of those fun, you know, we don't always have the opportunity to do this, but this one is one I wanted to do, where this console you have to interact with, and it's just an F interact. We didn't want to. We initially had a puzzle idea for this, but that got out of scope. And so what I ended up doing instead is just making this one of our profession-specific things, where because I'm a thief, I can use a lockpick to pry open the plate and cut the power cables. If I was an engineer, I could do it a different way. If I was a warrior or one of the like sort of melee classes, you could just smack it with your foot key. And I think if you were a mesmer or an elementalist, I think you can use magic to like freeze the lock or like weave a chaos thread inside the thing. You know, like I wanted to give it a little bit of flavor. It's still just, in the end, an F interact that brings up a conversation. But I know I appreciate this as a player when it recognizes my class and what I can do specifically as a thief. So you break the panel and you go in here. This is one of the very first pieces of content that I implemented for this chapter, because of the way that cinematics run way ahead of where we are on the design side. So like the cinematic was written and it was very much far along while this was still gray boxed, this whole instance. So because that was a known quantity, I was actually able to, hey Mr. Tour Guide, I was actually able to author the lead-in to the cinematic fairly early, because the cinematic was already stubbed in and I could just hook it up. I'm not going to do the optional defeat the Risen Walkers, or Workers. I've watched too much Walking Dead. Actually, I mean, that is a good touch point again. Speaking of, I put these Risen Workers in as a bit of a nod to my I do love Walking Dead. I'm a big fan. You know, that show has definitely had its ups and downs. I think it's finishing strong for me. I love that show. The last couple seasons have been really strong, so I just wanted to have a little bit of a, you know, you have the, you know, the flood of zombies that are making their way towards you, and you can take them out and get an achievement for doing so. I mean, they're all gonna blow up anyway, so I don't know. Maybe you should get the achievement regardless, but. Also wanted to give players an excuse to explore in here, because there's a couple little side rooms that you don't necessarily need to go into, but that Jesse, the map artist, added, and I didn't want them to go to waste. So I did have this where, I mean, eventually, like as you see here, I do have them come find the player, just to make it easier, so that you're not having to like necessarily go all the way around. Alright, killed them all. I did miss the moment where Jory smacks the tour guide and turns it off, which was a funny moment. Here we have another thing where, because we have this cinematic coming up, we used to kind of force the camera to look at my Trin here, but it just always felt really jarring. You know, we don't like to pull the camera as much as as you know, maybe other games do, because we want players to have agency about where they're looking. But you know, if something important is on screen, we also want them to see it. And so that was a case where we kind of split the difference, and we're like, you know what, we have Marjorie saying the line, "Oh, look down there, it's mine." Hopefully, you know, that's a cue of, hey, maybe you should look down. But when we had that line and the camera getting pulled to force players to look at my, it was too much. So we ended up cutting that part.
You were right after all.
Huge kudos to the cinematics team for this cinematic. It's amazing. I don't know. Like there's really nothing I can say about it, and I should probably just not talk over it.
Sight's still off.
Anka's eyes, though, man. Oh, they're so good.
Captain Anka here. Rendezvous at the hideout.
The reason I think this works so well is that this was very much born of Quan Purng, who wanted Anka to be, you know, our first really sort of dangerous feeling Asura. Like we've had Asura who are definitely like antagonists, but I think, you know, we wanted to make one that was like really, really scary. Like she just is like lethal in every way, and I think we did succeed at that. And I think the way that she was written, the way that she was performed by Sarah Sokolovich was just phenomenal. I think we really got Anka right.
You're all under arrest for destruction of Zoom-like property, acts of terrorism, and corporate espionage. Lay down your weapons and surrender immediately. Failure to comply will result in hostile action when we enter the building.
Guess we don't get a chance to explain ourselves.
It does look pretty bad from their point of view.
Well, I'm not standing around waiting to get scapegoated. What do you say we slip out while we can, Commander?
I'd say that's a good idea.
If the authorities are after us, we should split up. I'll look after Gorik. Rendezvous with you later.
This was a fun thing where we were splitting up the party, which is something we don't often do, or if we do, like, you go on and the others go ahead or stay behind. In this case, I had to do this. I had to make sure that you couldn't get in the same escape pod with them, because that caused so many bugs. Yeah, so I had to like put an invisible wall. One of the rare cases where we end up using an invisible wall. All right. So yeah, we're getting towards the end of this chapter, this instance. So I will probably, what will I do? Because of the way that this instance ends, where you actually launch the escape pod, I'll probably end up tacking on the start of Chapter 8 to this as well, just because, yeah. So that's what I'll do. This also is another little nod to BioShock, the original, because I believe at the end of that, or is it BioShock 2, or maybe it's both. Now I can't remember, because it's been several years since I played either. But yeah, in one of them you end up escaping Rapture in a bathysphere, and so it's like, hey, the escape pod totally works, and
Did you get out?
we put the escape pod here for you, you know, so you have a
I know. I'm on her trail.
bit of consistency. It does not have collision because it's a player-specific gadget, which is one of the unfortunate things. We don't have player-specific collision yet, unfortunately. So,
She's headed east.
but it's a nice little visual trick.
I'll do my best to follow.
There's also a really cool visual Easter egg that I don't know how many players have seen, But Aureen says that she's headed east, and yep, you see the streak in the sky. I actually missed part of it. She is actually headed east. Yeah. Anyway, that is it for Chapter 7. So we are going to call it here. And we will pick up again with the Chapter 8 playthrough next time, titled Fallout. So hopefully I definitely had a lot of fun building this chapter. I have a lot of fun playing it still. It's again my favorite piece of content that I've ever authored for Guild Wars 2. I'm extremely happy with how it turned out. The team that I was paired with, from audio to art to map design, everybody was just knocked it out of the park. We collaborated heavily with Cinematics team because of those cinematic moments in it. Like, it's just, it turned out as well as anything could turn out in my view. Like, even with some of the things that we had to do to work around restrictions that we had. So I'm super proud of it. I think hopefully that shows. I was super excited to talk about it and give you a little bit of behind the scenes knowledge on it. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and I will be looking forward to catching up with you again in a little bit to talk about the next chapter, Chapter 8, Fallout. All right, see you soon.